I want you to picture something for a minute. The absolute apex of 1970s engineering. We are talking about a machine that is, it's basically a cathedral of science. The Browns Ferry nuclear plant. It's March 1975. You've got two massive units running at full power, churning out something like 2,200 megawatts of electricity. It's loud, it's impressive, and it's, arguably the most sophisticated piece of infrastructure on the planet at that moment.
It was absolutely the pride of the fleet. You have to remember, in 1975, nuclear power wasn't just a utility, it was the future.
The whole too cheap to meter idea.
Exactly. And Browns Ferry was a beast. I mean, a complex web of redundancies, safety systems, miles and miles of cabling, thousands of sensors. It was designed to withstand, well, anything. Earthquakes, floods, tornadoes.
Right. It's the Death Star power plants. It's supposed to be indestructible.
It's supposed to be.
And now I want to introduce the weapon that nearly took this entire high-tech fortress down. It wasn't a missile. It wasn't a cyber attack. It wasn't even, a structural failure. It was a candle.
A literal wax and wick candle.
It sounds like the setup for a bad joke, right? Or a riddle. What brings down $1 billion facility but costs, 5 cents? But it's not a joke. It's terrifyingly real.
It is.
You have workers deep in the bowels of this facility in what's called the cable spreading room. Now, for those who haven't walked a plant, what is that exactly?
The cable spreading room is basically the brainstem of the reactor. Think of it as the main junction box where all the nerve endings, all the control cables meet before they go up to the control room.
The central nervous system.
Precisely. And these guys are down there checking for air leaks in the wall seals. And their high-tech space-age detection tool is an open flame. It sounds completely insane to us now, but we have to put it in context. It was, believe it or not, a standard practice at the time.
Really?
Yeah. They were checking for drafts. The logic was, if the flame flickers, air is moving. If air is moving, the seal isn't tight. It was a low-tech solution to a high-tech problem. Incredibly risky, obviously, but standard.
So on this specific day, a worker holds the candle up to a penetration seal. It's made of polyurethane foam. The flame flickers.
Yep.
It gets sucked into the hole. The foam, which is basically solid gasoline, catches fire. And because of that very draft they were looking for, the fire gets sucked right into the wall, deep into the cable trays.
And just like that, the brain of the reactor is on fire.
The lights in the control room go haywire, the pumps stop, the alarm starts screaming, and suddenly we are staring down the barrel of a full-blown meltdown.
And that candle, that single, simple point of failure, is where we have to start today. Because usually on this deep dive, we look at how complex systems function. We marvel at the engineering.
Today we're doing the opposite.
Today we're looking at what happens when the engineering stops mattering. We're looking at what happens when the manual, the procedure you've trained on your whole career, becomes a suicide pact.
We've got a massive stack of sources today to help us unpack this. There are forensic analyses of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, which has some amazing parallels.
Yes, on the human performance side.
Exactly. We have detailed timelines of the Pacts fuel cleaning incident in Hungary. And this is the big one, extensive case studies from Dr. Charles Casto.
And for anyone who doesn't know the name, Dr. Chuck Casto is an absolute heavyweight in this field. He was the lead federal executive the U.S. government sent to Japan during the Fukushima meltdown.
So he was there, in the room.
He was boots on the ground. He literally wrote the book on extreme crisis management. So when he talks about the fog of war, he isn't speaking theoretically. He lived it.
And we are using all these sources to talk about a concept we're calling the 1% contingency.
I think that's the perfect framing for it because 99% of a reactor operator's life, or a pilot's or a grid manager's, is routine compliance. It's boring, and that's good. The manuals work, the systems function. You follow step A, you get result B. It's all very linear.
But this deep dive, this is about the other 1%, the Black Swan events, Fukushima, Browns Ferry, the ongoing crisis at Zaporizhia in Ukraine. These are the moments where the infrastructure you're standing in assumes a reality that simply no longer exists.
We're defining what we call the manual gap.
What do you do when following the procedure is physically impossible? The manual says, open valve X, but valve X has melted. Or the lights are out and you can't find it. Or, and this is the most terrifying one, the sensors are just lying to you.
What happens when the map no longer matches the territory?
Exactly. And we have a very specific mission today. This isn't just, true crime for engineering nerds, though it is that too. We are extracting survival lessons for 3 specific groups of people who might be listening.
Okay.
First, the reactor operators themselves, the people in the chair, the last line of defense. Second, the simulator instructors, the people responsible for training those operators to face the unfathomable.
That's a huge one.
And third, operations leadership, the people in the suits in the corporate office who have to manage the politics and the media while the plant is burning.
It is a study in human performance at the absolute limit, a playbook for when things go catastrophically wrong.
So let's go back to Alabama, 1975. The candle. When I was reading the forensic report on this, there was one detail that made me physically stop reading and just stare at the wall. This fire, this near catastrophe. It wasn't a freak accident.
No, not at all. It was an inevitability waiting to happen.
A similar fire, a smaller one, had occurred 2 days prior using the exact same method.
That's the part of the story that is the most frustrating. It's infuriating, actually. The engineers knew. They had actually met after that first small fire. They sat in a conference room, they looked at the data, and they agreed, hey, sticking a lit candle next to flammable polyurethane foam in a high draft area is probably a bad idea.
A stunning conclusion.
Right, a real breakthrough.
What?
They all agreed the practice should stop.
So why was that guy down there with a candle 2 days later?
Because no official order was issued, no new protocol was written down and distributed, the knowledge stayed in the meeting room, the conversation died in committee, the decision never made it from the strategic level to the tactical level.
This is a classic textbook example of what the sociologist Diane Vaughan calls normalization of deviance, right?
Exactly. It is such a critical concept for anyone in a high-stakes job. When you survive a near miss, when you do something dangerous and get away with it, or the bad thing that happens is easily fixed, you don't treat it as a warning.
You treat it as success.
You treat it as a success. You think, well, we got away with it, the system's robust enough to handle it, and that lowers your guard for the next time. The deviant behavior using the candle becomes the normal behavior because the negative feedback loop of disaster hasn't closed yet.
So because the first fire was put out easily with a fire extinguisher, they just unconsciously assumed the next one would be too. They normalized the risk.
Precisely, until the risk scaled up exponentially and tried to kill them.
Okay, so the fire catches. And this time, it's not a small flicker they can put out with a handheld extinguisher. It spreads fast. It gets into those cable trays. And this is where we see the cascade of failure. It's not just that there's a fire, it's what the fire takes out along the way.
You have to visualize the anatomy of the plant. Those cable trays are carrying the power and control signals for the safety systems. When they burn, the brain is being severed from the body, limb by limb.
And the first thing to go is the big one.
Unit 1 loses its Emergency Core Cooling System, the ECCS. This is your break glass in case of emergency system. It's a whole suite of pumps designed to keep the nuclear fuel covered with water so it doesn't melt. That system is now gone. It's been blinded and paralyzed.
And what's happening inside the control room at this point?
It is absolute, undiluted chaos. Smoke starts filling the room. Thick, black, acrid smoke from the burning PVC insulation on the cables. They lose control power, which means they can't operate valves remotely from their panels anymore.
So the buttons don't work.
The buttons don't work. They lose visibility. Literally, the smoke is getting so thick they can't see the panels in front of them. And metaphorically, the instruments start dying or giving wild, nonsensical readings. They're flying blind into a hurricane.
There's one detail in the official timeline that really struck me as a perfect symbol of this blindness. The alarm printer.
The alarm printer, yes.
Yeah.
This is so important. In any plant, you rely on the logs to reconstruct what happened. The printer is this machine that just chatters away, spitting out a paper record of every alarm every time a valve opens or shuts. It's the black box data recorder.
It's the official history of the event.
It is. But at Browns Ferry, the alarm printer ran out of paper at 4:30 p.m.
Nobody replaced it.
They were a little busy trying not to die. It wasn't replaced for 24 hours. So for the most critical period of the entire event, there was a literal physical gap in the history. We are relying entirely on human memory, which, as we know, is incredibly fallible under that kind of stress.
So you have operators literally choking on smoke, looking at dead dials with no record of what's happening. But here is where the story gets really, truly infuriating. While the operators are fighting for their lives and for the safety of the public, there is a massive argument happening just outside the control room.
A bureaucratic turf war.
About how to put the fire out.
This is a classic case of what we call leadership paralysis. You had two key figures, the Athens, Alabama fire chief on one side and the plant manager on the other.
Okay, let's role play this for a second because it's so absurd. Yeah. I'm the fire chief. I show up, I see a fire. It's burning cable insulation, polyurethane foam, some wood. To me, that is a Class A fire.
Okay.
I want to use water. Water puts out Class A fires. This is like day one of Fire Academy. It is the most basic rule of firefighting.
Right. And I'm the plant manager. I'm looking at my emergency manual, and I'm looking at the design basis of my plant.
Oh.
My book says that a fire in the cable spreading room is an electrical fire, a Class C fire.
Okay.
And you do not put water on an electrical fire. Why? Because you risk electrocuting my firefighters.
Yeah.
And you risk shorting out the equipment that might still be working. So I am forbidding you from using water. My procedure says CO2 only.
But the cables were de-energized. The fire had already burned through them. There was no electricity left to short out. It was just a pile of burning plastic.
That is the physical reality. But the plant manager was stuck in his mental model. He was trapped by his procedure. He was operating in the policy universe, protecting the asset. The fire chief was in the physics universe, trying to put the fire out.
How long did this argument go on for?
Hours.
Yeah.
The fire started around noon. They argued and debated and tried using CO2 extinguishers that were completely ineffective against a fire that deep-seated. They didn't put water on it until roughly 7:00 p.m.
7 hours.
7 hours.
And what happened when they finally turned the fire hoses on it?
The fire was out in 20 minutes.
That is... it makes you want to scream. It's just unbelievable.
It is a stark, brutal lesson for operations leadership. Command conflicts, who has the final say in an emergency, must be resolved before the crisis. You need clear lines of authority. If you are debating jurisdiction while the Corps is heating up, you have already failed.
The plant manager was technically following the rules.
He was. But the rules no longer applied to the physical reality in front of him. And that policy paralysis almost caused a meltdown.
So the fire is finally out, but the reactor is still in deep, deep trouble. The water level is dropping. They're getting dangerously close to uncovering the fuel. I think the number was 48 inches.
48 inches above the top of the active fuel. In a reactor vessel that is tens of feet tall, 48 inches is nothing. That's your entire margin between a controlled shutdown and an uncontrolled meltdown. If that fuel gets uncovered by water, it starts to heat up, the cladding fails, and you are in Fukushima territory.
And all the normal ways to get water in are dead. The ECCS pumps are gone. The high-pressure pumps are gone.
Everything is gone.
So what do? This is where the improvisation, that 1% contingency thinking comes in.
This is the moment in the story where the manual gap becomes a chasm. When the procedures fail, you need a human who understands the machine on a deeper level than the manual does. And they had one, a shift engineer.
And he remembered something.
He remembered a system that wasn't in the standard emergency operating procedures at all. It was a backup nitrogen system that had been installed way back during the plant's construction phase.
Nitrogen? What? How does nitrogen help get water into a reactor?
Okay, so this gets a little technical, but it's crucial. The reactor is highly pressurized, right? To get water in, you need a pump that can overcome that pressure.
Makes sense.
The high-pressure pumps were dead. They only had some low-pressure pumps available, the condensate booster pumps, basically weaker pumps. But they couldn't push water in against the high pressure inside the reactor. It would be like trying to inflate a car tire with your mouth.
So they needed to lower the pressure in the reactor first, depressurize it.
Exactly. They needed to open the main steam relief valves to blow off steam and lower the pressure. But there was another problem. The valves themselves were air-operated. They needed compressed air to open.
And let me guess, the air compressors were burned out in the fire.
The air compressors were burned out. So no air, no valves, no depressurization. No depressurization, no water, meltdown. It was a checkmate.
Until this engineer remembers, wait a minute, there's a construction-era nitrogen bottle system hooked up somewhere in the plant.
Yes. High-pressure nitrogen bottles. They could use that nitrogen as a substitute for the compressed air to force the valves open.
Yeah.
But they couldn't just push a button in the control room.
No, they had to go in.
The operators had to put on breathing gear, which, by the way, only had about 18 minutes of air in the tanks, and physically go into the dark, smoke-filled reactor building. They had to manually find these specific valves in the chaos, hook up the nitrogen lines, and line them up by hand.
That is heroism.
Yeah.
I mean, that is straight up no asterisk heroism.
It is absolute heroism.
Yeah.
But let's also look at it critically from a systemic point of view. It's also a terrifying sign of systemic failure.
How so?
Because when the design basis ends, when the manual is useless, the very last safety barrier is one person's memory of a non-standard system. If that shift engineer hadn't remembered a construction detail from years ago, we would almost certainly be talking about the Alabama meltdown of 1975.
The entire safety of the eastern seaboard rested on one guy's memory.
That is a terrifyingly fragile safety margin. And it's the perfect segue into our next segment. Because Browns Ferry was about, seeing the problem, the fire, but being handcuffed by policy. But sometimes you can't even see the problem. Sometimes the physics is completely invisible.
Let's talk about Pacts.
The Pacts nuclear power plant in Hungary. This was 2003. And if Browns Ferry is a story about paralysis, Pacts is a story about the blind spot.
Set the scene for us. This wasn't a normal plant operation, was it?
No, not at all. They were doing a special fuel cleaning operation. Basically, they had some fuel assemblies that had crud magnetite deposits on them, and they needed to clean them off. So they built a special temporary tank system to do this cleaning process.
That phrase, temporary tank, that phrase always makes me nervous in these engineering stories.
It should. It absolutely should.
Yeah.
Whenever you introduce a temporary, non-standard system into a permanent, highly regulated plant, you're introducing new, unknown risks that haven't been tested by decades of operation.
And this tank was designed by an outside contractor.
It was. And here is where we get to the core concept of this incident. Expertise asymmetry.
Break that down for us. What does that mean?
It means different groups of people had different critical pieces of information, and they never shared them. The engineers, the people who designed the tank, knew a very specific, very important piece of thermodynamics.
Okay.
They knew the volume of water in the cleaning tank was relatively small, and the amount of heat still coming off that spent nuclear fuel was high. They did the math. They calculated that if the cooling water stopped flowing for any reason, the water inside that small tank would boil away in roughly 12 minutes.
12 minutes, that's the time to boil. That is the fuse on the bomb.
That is the fuse. But here is the absolute tragedy of Pacts. The operators, the people standing at the controls running the system, they did not know this number.
They didn't know about the 12-minute window.
It wasn't in their procedure. It wasn't in their training. The engineers knew the cliff was there, but they never put up a warning sign for the people driving the car. The most important piece of information about the system was never given to the people operating it.
So the operators are flying a plane, and nobody told them they only have 12 minutes of fuel if the engine cuts out.
It's worse than that. It's so much worse. They didn't even know the engine had cut out. The cleaning tank had a fatal design flaw in its instrumentation.
Okay, what was it?
The inlet for the cooling water was at the bottom of the tank, and the outlet was at the top. The thermometer, the only sensor they had to tell them the temperature of the process, was on the outlet pipe outside the tank.
Okay, so if the water's flowing normally, the sensor sees the temperature of the water leaving the tank? That seems like it would work.
It does, under normal conditions. But what happens if the inlet at the bottom gets blocked by some debris?
The flow stops.
The flow stops. Inside the tank, the water immediately starts to heat up. The hot water, which is lighter, rises to the top of the tank inside the vessel. But because there's no flow, pushing it out into the outlet pipe.
The sensor on the pipe doesn't see it.
The sensor on the pipe sees the stagnant, trapped water in the pipe getting colder.
Oh my God. So the flow stops, the tank is turning into a pressure cooker, but the operator on the control panel sees the temperature dropping.
Exactly. The operator sees the temperature going down and thinks, oh good, the cleaning process must be finished. The fuel is cooling down. He's getting the exact opposite signal of the disaster that is unfolding 3 feet away from the sensor.
That is a nightmare scenario. Your instrumentation is actively lying to you, or rather, it's telling you a truth that is completely irrelevant to the actual danger.
And that's what happened. Inside the tank, the water boiled off. The fuel was uncovered. It overheated. It got so hot over 1,000 degrees Celsius that when they finally realized something was catastrophically wrong and dumped cold emergency water on it, the thermal shock just shattered the fuel rods.
They didn't just melt, they crumbled.
They shattered like glass. It was a massive release of radioactive noble gases into the atmosphere. A major incident.
And this brings us to a huge, flashing red light lesson for simulator instructors and anyone who designs training programs.
Absolutely. You cannot just teach operators which buttons to push and in what order. That's not enough.
You have to teach them the physics.
You must teach them the cliffs. You cannot just teach them to drive the car. You have to teach them where the edge of the road is and how fast they're approaching it. If an operator doesn't know the fundamental physical time constraints, like you have 12 minutes before physics takes over and you lose, they cannot make informed decisions.
They're just following steps until the steps run out.
And if those operators at Pacts knew time to boil equals 12 minutes, the second they saw the flow stop, they would have panicked. They would have hit every emergency button in the room. And that panic would have saved the fuel. Instead, they were calm because their instruments told them to be calm. They were ignorant of the danger.
Ignorance is bliss until the radiation alarm goes off. It reminds me of the analysis of Deepwater Horizon that was in our source stack. There's this concept of the paper captain versus the salt.
This is a fascinating comparison from the human performance side of things, yeah. On the Deepwater Horizon oil rig, you had leadership that was, on paper, fully certified. They had all of the paperwork. Captain Kuta, the master of the vessel, had a spotless record.
The sources have this great phrase for it. They say he had a record of turning right to avoid storms.
Which is a metaphor, but it's also literal. It means he was excellent at routine compliance. He knew how to follow the rules to stay safe. He was an expert at avoiding trouble.
But that meant he had no scar tissue.
Exactly. He had never managed a catastrophic failure where the rules didn't work. He had the title, the authority, but not the fingertip feel for a crisis. He hadn't been through the fire.
And when the blowout happened, when the methane gas kicked up the riser pipe.
The research, and this is sobering stuff, suggests that in a true life-or-death crisis, about 80% of people freeze.
80%.
80. It's a biological shutdown. Your amygdala, the fear center of the brain, hijacks your prefrontal cortex. You literally cannot process complex information. You turn into a statue. All your training goes out the window.
That is a staggeringly high number.
It's just human biology. Another 10% panic and do the wrong thing. They run around screaming or push random buttons, making things worse. Only about 10% of people act effectively and rationally.
So Kuchta, the paper captain, he froze.
The testimony from the survivors suggests he was overwhelmed. He wasn't making the rapid-fire, decisive calls needed to activate the blowout preventer or disconnect the rig. He was a paper captain. He had the rank, but he didn't have the crisis reflexes that only come from experiencing failure.
And the sources mention that, unlike an airplane, the Deepwater Horizon didn't have a black box, a cockpit voice recorder.
Right, which is a huge problem for investigators. We have to rely on blurry human memory. You see key players in their testimony saying, "I don't recall," over and over again when asked about critical safety protocols. But the lesson for instructors here is brutal, and it's essential.
Which is?
You must train for destructive failure.
What does that mean, destructive failure?
It means that if your simulator scenarios always end in success, you are training for complacency. You are teaching your operators that if they just follow the procedure, everything will be fine in the end. You need to put operators in no-win situations. Situations where they fail, where the plant in the simulator melts down, where they die, virtually.
Why? I mean, that sounds incredibly demoralizing.
Because they need to feel that freeze in a safe environment. They need to recognize the physiological symptoms of the amygdala hijack, the tunnel vision, the time dilation, the dry mouth, the auditory exclusion. If they experience it for the first time in the simulator, they can learn techniques to break out of it.
But if the first time they feel that primal terror is during a real accident?
They're going to be part of the 80% who freeze. You have to inoculate them against the freeze. You have to build up that scar tissue in a controlled way.
You have to break the sonar dome.
We will absolutely get to that sonar dome analogy in the final segment, because it is the perfect capstone for this entire discussion. But first, we have to go to the ultimate case study in the 1% contingency, the event that defined modern nuclear history.
Fukushima.
Fukushima. This is where all these threads, ferries, manual gap, Pacts blindness, Deepwater's biological freeze come together in one single, massive, prolonged disaster.
It's the masterclass in what not to do and what you have to do.
It really is.
So, March 11, 2011, the sources talk about the White Swan and the Black Swan. Break that down for us.
The White Swan was the earthquake. It was enormous, a magnitude 9.0, one of the strongest ever recorded in history. But the plant was designed for earthquakes, and the system worked perfectly.
The engineering held up?
It did. The seismic sensors felt the shaking, the control rods shot into the cores, the reactors all scrammed, the plant shut down safely. If the story had ended right there, it would be a global success story for nuclear engineering.
But then comes the Black Swan. The event they said was impossible. The event that was literally beyond their design basis.
The tsunami. They had built seawalls that were designed for a 5.7-meter wave, which was the largest they had ever historically seen. The wave that hit the plant that day was over 14 meters.
45 feet of water crashing over 18-foot walls.
It's unimaginable. It floods the basements. It drowns the emergency diesel generators. It sweeps away their fuel tanks. The grid is down from the earthquake, and now their backup power is gone. It is a total station blackout, or SBO.
And Dr. Casto's account of what that's like is just terrifying. He describes an ocean of silence.
That is the phrase that sticks with me more than any other. You have a nuclear control room that is usually a symphony of noise, fans humming, lights flickering, alarms chirping, people talking, and then suddenly the power dies. The lights go out. The fans stop. The screens go black. It is dead silent.
Wow.
Pitch black, except for maybe a few emergency flashlights bobbing around. And then debris starts falling from the ceiling because of the earthquake aftershocks.
And the instrumentation, your eyes and ears on the reactor.
Gone. Everything is gone. You don't know the water level, you don't know the pressure, you don't know the temperature. You are in the belly of a dying beast, and you can't hear its heartbeat or feel its breath. You are completely, utterly blind.
And this is where we get our first major lesson from Fukushima, which comes from the shift supervisor, Izawa. He calls it, cement your feet.
Imagine that scene. The ground is shaking so violently you can't stand up. The alarms are screaming before the power dies. Your animal instinct, the primal lizard brain instinct, is to run, flee, save yourself.
Of course.
These operators are human beings. They have families. They want to get out of there.
But Izawa doesn't run.
No. He stands his ground in the middle of the chaos. He sees the panic rising in the eyes of his team, and he gives a command that seems completely counterintuitive at that moment. He says, don't operate the plant. Don't touch anything until the shaking stops.
Why? I mean, the plant is in a massive crisis. Shouldn't they be flipping switches and trying to fix things?
No, because panic-induced action leads to error. If they started flipping switches in that state of abject terror, they would make mistakes. They might open a valve that should be closed or close one that should be open, making things infinitely worse. Izawa knew that his first job wasn't to manage the reactor. It was to manage the psychology of his team.
He had to stop the panic spiral.
He anchored them. He cemented his own feet to the floor to send a message. I am here, we are staying, we're going to handle this together. He enforced routine over reaction. He bought them a moment of mental clarity. And in a crisis like that, clarity is more valuable than speed.
A wrong action taken quickly is far worse than a right action taken after a moment of thought.
Infinitely worse.
But even with that clarity, they were still fighting the fog of war. And this leads to lesson 2. Let's talk about the misty fog error.
This is a tragedy of mental models and confirmation bias. The operators, in the dark, looked out the window of the control room towards the reactor building, and through the gloom, they saw a misty fog rising from the vents on the side of the building.
And what did they think that was?
They interpreted it based on their training. They thought, oh, that's steam. That steam must be coming from the isolation condenser. The isolation condenser is a passive, gravity-driven cooling system. If it's steaming, that's a good sign. It means it's boiling water and removing heat from the core.
So they see this mist and they think, great, the backup system is working, we're being cooled, we're safe for now.
Exactly. They relaxed. They reported up the chain of command that the isolation condenser was in service and working. They thought the core was being cooled.
But it wasn't.
No, it was a complete illusion. The system had failed hours earlier. The valves hadn't opened correctly. The steam they were seeing was likely coming from somewhere else, or it was just residual moisture. The core was actively melting while they stood there thinking they were safe.
This is what the sources call a complete breakdown in team sense.
Yes. Team sense is the shared mental model of the entire crew. It's the answer to the question, what is the plant doing right now? Their team sense said cooling. The physical reality of the plant was melting. And because they relied on a single ambiguous visual cue, they confirmed what they wanted to believe. They lost hours of critical time.
That is terrifying. It just shows you how desperate the human brain is for good news in a crisis. It'll latch onto anything.
It will. And that leads directly to lesson 3, which focuses on the site superintendent, a man named Yoshida. This is the story of the seawater injection incident.
This is my favorite part of the Fukushima story. It feels like something out of a movie script, but it's real life.
It really is. So the situation is dire. They have no fresh water left to cool the reactors. Storage tanks are empty. The fire trucks have run out of water. The only source of water they have is the Pacific Ocean, which is, right there.
Limitless water.
So they start rigging up fire hoses and pumps to get seawater into the reactor cores. It's a desperate last-ditch Hail Mary. But then the call comes from Tokyo.
Corporate headquarters, TEPCO, and the Prime Minister's office get involved.
And this is where the strategic universe collides violently with the tactical universe. The suits in Tokyo, the leaders, they were worried about destroying the asset.
What does that mean?
Once you put salt water in a nuclear reactor, the salt corrodes everything. It's ruined. It's junk. You can never turn it back on. It's a $1 billion write-off per unit.
So they are literally thinking about the company's balance sheet while the plant is exploding.
They're thinking about the future of the company, the stock price, the liability. They order Yoshida to stop the seawater injection. They tell him to wait for fresh water to arrive.
But Yoshida, on the ground, knows there is no fresh water coming anytime soon. He knows that if he stops pumping water, the core melts completely. It breaches the containment vessel. It's a global catastrophe.
Exactly. So Yoshida does something absolutely legendary. He gets on the video conference with HQ. He listens to the direct order from the Prime Minister's office. He says, "Okay, I understand. We will stop injection." And then he puts his hand over the microphone, turns to his staff in the Emergency Response Center, and whispers, "Ignore that. Keep pumping."
Ignore that. Keep pumping.
Wow. That is the operator's prerogative. It's what Dr. Casto calls the Bushido Mindset. The person closest to the danger, the person of last resort, must have the authority and the courage to prioritize public safety over the asset.
Casto frames this as social justice versus technical justice.
Yes. Technical justice is protecting the machine, following the procedure, obeying the chain of command. Social justice is protecting the people, the village, the nation, the world. Yoshida realized that his duty to the public now trumped his duty to his bosses. He committed professional suicide and mutiny to save Japan.
That gives me goosebumps every time I hear it. And finally, from Fukushima, Lesson 4, the Isaiah moment.
This one is heavy. This is about moral courage. The situation is deteriorating further. They need to vent the primary containment vessel of one of the reactors. The pressure is building up like a bomb. If it bursts, it releases everything.
A dirty bomb scenario.
The worst case. But the remote-controlled vent valves have failed. To vent it, someone has to physically go into the reactor building, into the darkness, into the incredibly high radiation fields, and manually crank the valve wheel by hand.
It was a potential suicide mission.
Absolutely. The dose rates were lethal. You're walking into a lethal dose of radiation. Izawa, the shift supervisor we mentioned earlier, the cement your feet guy, he volunteers, he grabs his gear, he says, "I'll go."
But his supervisors stop him?
They overrule him. They tell him no. The leader must stay to command. If the leader goes in and dies, the whole team structure falls apart. The command and control collapses.
So who went?
The older operators, the veterans, the men in their 50s and 60s, they step forward and volunteer to go instead of the young operators in their 20s and 30s.
Why?
Their reasoning was simple and profound. They said they had already lived their lives, their kids were grown, they'd had their time, the young operators had young families, small children, they had their futures ahead of them. The veterans decided to absorb the radiation dose to protect the next generation.
That stops you in your tracks. It's beyond just doing your job.
It is. It shows that leadership and the 1% contingency isn't just technical. It isn't just knowing which valve to turn. It's moral courage. It's looking at the reality of death and making a conscious choice to protect others. That is the ultimate definition of being an operator.
You know, we talk about these heroic, in-the-moment decisions, but there's also this massive psychological game being played between the control room and the outside world. We touched on it with Yoshida versus HQ.
The cognitive split, yeah.
Right. And that's really the focus of segment 4 of our deep dive. The sources describe 2 different universes operating at the exact same time during a crisis.
You have the tactical universe, that's the control room. Their reality is immediate. It's survival, it's thermodynamics, pressure, temperature, water levels. Their time scale is seconds and minutes. Their input is raw sensory data from the plant.
And then you have the strategic universe.
That is headquarters, the government, the media. Their reality is completely different. It's political fallout, it's corporate liability, it's public perception, the news cycle. Their primary question isn't, is the core covered? It's, how does this look on CNN?
And these 2 universes, they don't speak the same language at all.
Not even close. And that friction, that disconnect, causes something called elite panic. The leaders in the strategic universe panic, not necessarily about the radiation, but about the public panicking. They want to be seen to be in control. They want to be seen doing something.
And that leads to this phenomenon called whipsawing.
Right. They oscillate their strategies based on noise rather than on data from the plan. One minute they get a bad news report and they say evacuate everyone. The next they get a slightly better report and they say tell everyone to stay put, then vent the reactor. Then, no, don't vent the reactor. It drives the operators in the tactical universe crazy because you can't run a nuclear reactor based on opinion polls.
So, Dr. Casto suggests a tool for the operators to manage their panicked bosses. It's called the goalpost strategy. Let's break this down because this is so useful for anyone who has to manage a panicked boss, not just in a nuclear plant.
This is a brilliant communication hack. If you are an operator on the ground, you never, ever feed raw, unprocessed data to a panicked leader.
Let's role play it. I'm the boss. I'm in my office, 100 miles away. I call you up. Expert, what's the pressure reading right now? Give me the number.
If I say it's 100 psi, what's your next question going to be?
Is that good or bad? Wait, was it 5 minutes ago? Is it going up or down? Why is it 100? What are you doing about it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to micromanage you to death.
Exactly. You are going to consume my limited cognitive bandwidth. So
Yeah.
instead, I use the goalpost strategy. I say, boss, listen, we have established 2 goalposts for this situation. The best worst case is goalpost A. The worst case is goalpost B. Right now, all our data indicates we are operating between the goalposts. As long as it stays there, please leave us alone to work the problem. We will only call you if we break a goalpost.
I see. So it frames the uncertainty. It tells me we're within the expected range of this disaster. It gives me boundaries.
It buys the control room silence. It lets the data bake so you're not reacting to every little flicker. It prevents those knee-jerk, whipsawing reactions from the top.
There's another tool mentioned in the sources that I love, managing the dog bowl.
I love this analogy. Think of a dog. A dog can only eat from one bowl at a time. It can't multitask eating. Operators, especially in a crisis, have extremely limited cognitive bandwidth. They are the dog.
And the single most important thing they need to do is cool the core. That's their dog bowl.
That's the one bowl they need to be eating from. But in a crisis, everyone tries to fill that bowl with other stuff.
Right. Administrative hurdles, phone calls from HR about overtime paperwork, minor alarms about a bathroom fan being broken. The sources call all of this debris.
It's all just noise.
So the discipline is?
If an action does not directly help cool the core, if it doesn't fill that vital dog bowl, you ignore it. You have to be ruthless in your focus.
And there's a case study for this, right? The October 4th precursor event.
Right. This wasn't a meltdown, but it was a classic near miss that was a huge warning about culture. You had a crew that got completely obsessed with a minor problem. A condensate tank level was fluctuating. It was annoying, but it wasn't dangerous. They were all focused on that one bowl.
They got tunnel vision.
Complete tunnel vision. Meanwhile, while they were all staring at this minor issue, they were completely ignoring a massive reactivity mismanagement happening right next to them. They were pulling control rods while the reactor water was cold, which is a very dangerous condition. They focused on the wrong bowl, and they came dangerously close to losing control of the plant's power.
It just shows how easily distraction can kill you. You solve the small, noisy problem, and you miss the big, quiet one that's about to end you.
Distraction is a high-consequence threat. You have to guard the dog bowl with your life.
Now, we have to pivot. We've talked about accidents. We've talked about fires and tsunamis, which are, acts of God or acts of man. But there is a new reality in nuclear operations, the truly unprecedented.
Zaporizhzhia.
The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. This is not a technical failure. This is not a natural disaster. This is a war zone.
It changes the rules of engagement entirely. It's a scenario that was never, ever envisioned by the people who designed these plants. We are talking about operating a civilian nuclear site at gunpoint.
The international safety standards list the 7 pillars of nuclear safety: physical integrity, functioning safety systems, the staff's ability to make decisions without pressure, off-site power supply, supply chains, radiation monitoring, and emergency arrangements.
And at Zaporizhzhia, as of this recording, all of them are compromised, every single one. Physical integrity, there have been mines planted on the perimeter and artillery shells have hit the roof. Supply chains, you can't get spare parts across an active front line. Staff decision-making. How can you make an unimpeded safety decision when an occupying soldier with a rifle is watching you do it?
Let's talk about the human toll here. We discussed Izawa's cement your feet at Fukushima. But how do you cement your feet when there is a literal army standing behind you?
The operators there are facing what psychologists call mortality salience, the constant conscious fear of death every single day. At Fukushima, the fear was the radiation or the tsunami, an impersonal force. At Zaporizhzhia, it is human violence.
The sources mention operators having to check under their cars for bombs before driving to work.
Can you imagine that psychological burden? You wake up, you check your car for a bomb, you drive to military checkpoints, you get to the control room, and then you are expected to have the mental clarity and focus to run a gigawatt-scale nuclear reactor.
And the fatigue must be incredible.
The fatigue, the chronic stress, the low morale, it is an insidious threat. You cannot maintain the hypervigilance needed for nuclear safety when you are wondering if your family is safe from shelling. That cognitive bandwidth we talked about. The dog bowl. It is already full of fear before your shift even starts.
Dr. Casto has a really grim but realistic insight here. He says that when it comes to Zaporizhia, it is too late for prevention.
Prevention assumes you can stop the bad thing from getting inside the fence. The hostile takeover has already happened. The bad guys are already inside. So the entire focus of the international community must shift from prevention to mitigation.
What does that look like? If you can't prevent the accident, how do you mitigate it in the middle of a war zone?
He suggests things like neutral staging areas, basically creating demilitarized safe zones nearby outside the plant and pre-positioning massive stockpiles of sand, boron, diesel pumps, generators, all the things you need to fight a meltdown.
And people. What about the human element?
And people. He talks about creating a force of international backup operators. He calls them the Thunderbirds, a rapid response force of expert operators who are staged and ready to deploy instantly to help mitigate the damage, because we have to assume that damage will happen. We can't rely on the on-site staff alone because they are effectively hostages.
It's a truly sobering reality. It forces us to rethink what safety even means in the 21st century, but it brings us to the final and maybe most important segment of our deep dive, the path forward. What do we do with all this? A manifesto for training?
If we want to avoid another Fukushima or another Browns Ferry, we have to fundamentally change how we train the people who run these facilities.
The sources are very, very critical of current training paradigms. They say, flat out, that we train for success.
We do. Think about a standard simulator session. The alarm goes off, the operator opens their procedure book, they follow the steps, they take the prescribed actions, the plant stabilizes, the instructor pats them on the back and says, "Good job, let's go to lunch."
Everyone high-fives and feels good about themselves.
But that is not the 1% contingency. That is the 99%. That is training them to be a paper captain. We need to train for failure.
And this is where that sonar dome analogy comes in. You promised to explain this one.
Right. It's a story from the U.S. Navy. Navy captains are trained that in a dire emergency, they can drop the anchor to stop the ship from, say, running aground. It's a last resort.
Okay.
But on modern destroyers, the expensive sonar dome, all the sensitive listening equipment, is on the bow, right under the water.
Yeah.
If you drop the anchor while the ship is moving fast, the heavy anchor chain can swing back and smash the dome. It's a multi-million-dollar repair.
So during training exercises, they tell the captains, simulate dropping the anchor, but don't actually do it because we don't want to break the expensive sonar dome.
Exactly. For years, they practiced protecting the equipment over performing the emergency action. And then there was a real incident. A ship lost power and was drifting toward rocks. The captain needed to drop the anchor to save the ship and the crew. But he froze. He hesitated.
Because his ingrained muscle memory was don't break the dome.
Precisely. He had been trained unconsciously to prioritize the asset over the mission. The ship ran aground.
So the lesson for nuclear instructors is you have to break the dome in the simulator.
You have to break the damn dome. Instructors need to ask themselves a hard question. Do your scenarios force a choice between compliance and physics? If a trainee breaks a rule to save the plant, if they engage in that technically defensible improvisation, like using the nitrogen at Browns Ferry, do you pass them or do you fail them for not following the procedure?
If you fail them for saving the plant because they didn't follow a manual that was no longer relevant,
then you are committing a training system failure. You are training them to die with the rulebook in their hands. You are actively creating paper captains who will freeze when it matters most.
that's a real powerful and damning statement.
But it's true. And it leads to the final philosophical point. We need to move past the idea of heroes.
No more heroes, that's the slogan from the sources.
We celebrate the Fukushima 50. We celebrate the Browns Ferry operators who went into the smoke. And we should. They are giants. But we have to recognize that heroism is a symptom of systemic failure.
If you need a hero, it means your system failed to protect you.
It means the engineering wasn't enough, the procedures weren't enough, the training wasn't enough. The ultimate goal of a high-reliability organization is to design systems and train leaders so robustly that extraordinary human heroism is never required.
Boring is good. Routine is good.
Heroism is the last desperate resort. We want to train operators who go home to their families after a boring shift, not operators who get statues built for them posthumously.
So let's wrap this all up with some final checklists. If you're listening to this and you are in one of these three roles we identified, here is your takeaway.
For operators, trust but verify. Look at the ammeter, not just the green light. The light tells you what the switch should be doing. The amps tell you what the pump is actually doing. Be professionally skeptical of your instruments. And be mentally prepared to be the person of last resort.
For instructors,
Design friction. Force the manual gap.
Yeah.
Make your trainees uncomfortable. Inoculate them against the freeze. Don't let them win every single time. Make them fail, and then teach them how to recover from it.
And finally, for leaders.
The mantra is listen, learn, help, then lead. In that order. Don't become a worker bee during a crisis. Don't run into the control room and start flipping switches. Maintain your strategic oversight role. Protect the dog bowl. And for God's sake, resolve your policy conflicts and command structure before the fire starts.
This has been an incredible deep dive. I mean, we've gone from a 5-cent candle in Alabama to a 45-foot tsunami in Japan to an active war zone in Ukraine.
It's a journey through the absolute extremes of human performance and system failure.
And I want to leave our listeners with one final provocative thought to chew on. We talked a lot about expertise asymmetry, that gap between the people who truly understand the technology and the people who are making the decisions.
Right. In Fukushima, you had politicians making life-or-death decisions on venting without a clue about the physics involved. In Pacts, you had operators running a tank without understanding the basic thermodynamics.
So let's connect this to the future. We're on the cusp of AI warfare, of autonomous systems running our infrastructure, our power grids, our financial markets. We are entering an era where the users of the tools understand the inner workings of those tools even less than before.
It is the ultimate expertise asymmetry. If an AI system starts acting in a Black Swan manner, if it starts doing something completely outside its programming, will the human operator even know how to intervene? Or will they just trust the misty fog on the screen because the algorithm says everything is safe?
That's the question for all of us. If the lights went out today, right now, in your workplace, and the manual was wrong, would you have the scar tissue to know what to do? Or would you freeze?
Stay curious.
Stay prepared. And keep diving deep.